They aren't refusing to speak. They're waiting. The words would not be spoken until much later, but on that cold November evening, the Whitmore mansion already felt like a place frozen in time. Ethan Whitmore slammed a folder onto the polished oak table, and the sharp sound echoed through the massive dining room. Across from him, a woman in a navy cardigan stood with trembling hands wrapped around her purse strap. She was nanny number 13. Her eyes glistened with frustration, exhaustion, and defeat. Ethan looked away before she could say another word. "Thank you for your time," he said flatly. "My assistant will arrange the payment." The woman nodded once and quietly walked toward the front door. She had lasted 6 days. The one before her lasted 8. The longest had survived nearly 3 weeks. None of them had succeeded. The heavy front door clicked shut, and silence settled over the mansion once again. Not ordinary silence. Not the peaceful kind people found in libraries or quiet neighborhoods. This silence felt alive. It stretched through the hallways, lingered beneath the crystal chandeliers, and sat heavily on every piece of furniture like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. Ethan rubbed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He was 42 years old, one of the most successful real estate developers in North Carolina, a man who could solve million-dollar problems with a phone call. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for the problem waiting upstairs. He turned his gaze toward the grand staircase. 3 small figures sat side by side on the landing. Noah, Liam, Ava, 7 years old. Triplets. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The warm glow from the chandelier above painted soft highlights across their faces, but their expressions remained distant. Noah held a silver wristwatch against his chest. Liam stared at the floor with a faded photograph resting in his lap. Ava clutched a small music box decorated with tiny blue flowers. Ethan knew those objects by heart. They belonged to Emily, his wife, their mother. 14 months had passed since the accident. 14 months since the laughter disappeared from the house. 14 months since 3 children had spoken their last words. At first, doctors told him grief worked differently for every child. Then therapists arrived. Child specialists, behavioral experts, trauma counselors, the best money could buy. They filled notebooks with observations and theories. They scheduled sessions. They offered strategies. They promised progress. Nothing changed. The children continued living inside a world nobody could enter. Ethan had watched professional after professional fail. He had watched hope arrive carrying briefcases and degrees, only to leave through the same front door defeated. And now another nanny was gone. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked softly. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. Ethan stood and walked toward the staircase. "Kids," he said gently. No response. Ava's fingers tightened around the music box. Liam lowered his eyes. Noah never looked up. Ethan's chest tightened. Every day felt like standing outside a locked room, while the people he loved most remained trapped inside. He took another step. Dinner's ready. Still nothing. Then from somewhere outside, headlights swept across the tall windows facing the circular driveway. Ethan glanced toward the entrance. A car had just pulled up. His assistant had mentioned a temporary housekeeper starting tonight. Honestly, he barely remembered approving it. The estate employed dozens of people. One more hardly mattered. Upstairs, the children remained perfectly still. Downstairs, the front door slowly opened. A gust of cool evening air drifted into the foyer. And for the first time in 14 months, someone was about to walk into the Whitmore mansion who would see something that everyone else had missed. The woman who stepped through the front door carried a single duffel bag and wore a dark green coat still dotted with tiny beads of rain. Maya Brooks paused just inside the foyer as the door closed behind her. Warm air replaced the November chill, but she immediately sensed something colder lingering beneath the mansion's polished beauty. The marble floors gleamed. The chandelier sparkled overhead. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases near the staircase. Everything looked perfect. Yet the house felt hollow, as though someone had removed its heartbeat. A middle-aged house manager named Linda greeted her with a tired smile. "Long drive?" she asked. Maya nodded. "About 3 hours." Linda took her coat and lowered her voice. "I should probably warn you. Most people do not stay very long." Maya glanced toward the staircase. The three children were still sitting exactly where they had been moments earlier. They looked less like siblings and more like statues placed there by a careful artist. They do not talk? Maya asked quietly. Linda sighed. Not to anyone. Before she could say more, Ethan descended the staircase. His expression remained polite but distant, like a man who had run out of energy for introductions. Miss Brooks, he said. Thank you for coming on short notice. Of course, sir. Your responsibilities are simple. Housekeeping, meal assistance, light supervision if needed. His voice paused briefly. You are not here as a nanny. Maya noticed something in the way he emphasized the last sentence. It sounded less like a job description and more like a warning. Understood, she replied. Ethan gave a short nod and headed toward his office. Within seconds he disappeared down a hallway lined with framed photographs. Maya's eyes drifted to the pictures. Nearly every frame included the same woman. Blonde hair. Bright smile. Kind eyes. Emily. Even without asking, Maya knew exactly who she was. The person everyone still missed. Upstairs, a faint creak echoed through the house. Maya looked toward the triplets again. Noah's fingers remained wrapped around the silver watch. Liam stared at the old photograph in his lap. Ava held the music box against her chest. None of them looked at her. None acknowledged her presence. Most adults might have considered that strange. Maya did not. She remembered her younger brother Marcus after their grandmother passed away. For weeks he barely spoke. Not because he had forgotten how. Because words felt too heavy to carry. Linda led Maya toward the kitchen. You can unpack later, she said. Dinner is almost ready. As they entered the room, Maya noticed 3 untouched place settings already waiting at the table. Small details stood out immediately. 3 glasses of milk. 3 folded napkins. 3 chairs positioned perfectly. Everything prepared with hope. Hope that the children might sit together. Hope that tonight might be different. Hope that tomorrow would somehow be easier than yesterday. Linda opened the oven and shook her head. Every evening we try. Maya looked back toward the hallway. Through the doorway she could see the staircase again. The children had not moved. Not even an inch. Her gaze settled on Ava. The little girl's hands tightened around the music box. For a brief moment, almost too quick to notice, Ava pressed the box against her ear as if listening for something hidden inside. Maya felt a quiet spark of curiosity. Everyone else seemed focused on why the children would not speak. But standing there in the warm kitchen light, watching the small movement nobody else appeared to notice, Maya found herself wondering a different question entirely. What were they still trying to hear? The next morning arrived wrapped in pale gray light. Thin clouds drifted across the North Carolina sky, while the first rays of sunlight stretched through the mansion's tall windows. Maya was already awake. She stood in the kitchen pouring coffee when she noticed something unusual. 3 bowls sat untouched on the breakfast table exactly where they had been placed the night before. Linda entered carrying a tray of fresh fruit inside. Every morning, she said quietly, we put breakfast out. Every morning we hope. Maya glanced toward the staircase. The triplets were there again. Same spot. Same silence. Yet now she paid closer attention. Noah's watch rested in his palm. Liam held the faded photograph. Ava cradled the music box. They never switched items. They never set them down. It was as though each object had become part of them. Maya carried a basket of folded towels upstairs later that morning. As she passed the second-floor hallway, she heard the faintest sound. Not a voice. Not footsteps. Music. Soft. Fragile. Barely louder than a whisper. She followed it to the library doorway. Ava sat alone by the window. Sunlight pooled across the hardwood floor around her feet. The little girl slowly turned the tiny key beneath the music box. A gentle melody drifted into the room. Ava closed her eyes. Maya remained still, careful not to interrupt. The tune lasted only a few seconds before stopping. Ava immediately wounded again. The melody returned. Again and again she repeated the motion. Not because she enjoyed the music. Because she seemed afraid of the silence that followed. Maya felt her chest tighten. She remembered hospital visits with her grandmother years ago. Sometimes her grandmother would replay old voicemail messages from family members simply to hear familiar voices. Not because she needed information. because memories felt closer when accompanied by sound. Ava suddenly opened her eyes and noticed Maya standing in the doorway. For a moment neither moved. Most adults would have started talking immediately. Maya did not. She simply offered a gentle smile. Ava stared back. Then, without warning, she stood and hurried from the room carrying the music box against her chest. The small footsteps faded down the hallway. Maya remained where she was. She had not been rejected. She had learned something. Later that afternoon she dusted shelves inside the family room. Hundreds of photographs filled the walls. Birthday parties, beach vacations, school plays, family cookouts. Emily appeared in almost every frame, laughing, hugging, dancing, living. Maya paused at one particular photograph. Emily sat on a picnic blanket with the triplets gathered around her. Noah wore the silver watch on his wrist. Liam held the same photograph, now faded from constant handling. Ava smiled while holding the blue music box. Maya stared at the image for several seconds. A realization slowly settled into place. The objects were not random keepsakes. Each child carried something directly connected to a specific memory, a memory of their mother. That evening Ethan returned from work later than usual. His tie hung loose around his collar as he stepped into the foyer. He looked exhausted. Maya watched him glance automatically toward the staircase. The children sat there once more. The familiar disappointment crossed his face before he quickly hid it. Then his eyes shifted toward Maya. "How was your first full day?" he asked. Maya hesitated briefly. "I think your children are trying very hard to remember something." Ethan frowned. "Remember what?" Maya looked toward the staircase where Ava's fingers rested protectively on the music box. "I do not know yet," she said softly. "But I think the answer has been sitting beside them this entire time." The question lingered in Ethan's mind long after the conversation ended. The answer has been sitting beside them this entire time. He repeated the words silently while standing alone in his office later that night. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain tapped softly against the glass. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but his attention remained fixed on the photograph resting on his desk. Emily smiled back at him from another life, another version of this house. A house filled with noise. Down the hall, Maya moved quietly through the second floor, carrying freshly folded laundry. As she passed the triplets' bedrooms, she noticed something else. Each room had been preserved almost perfectly. No major changes. No redecorating. No attempt to move forward. It was as if time had stopped 14 months earlier. Noah's room contained model airplanes hanging from the ceiling. Liam's room held shelves filled with adventure books. Ava's room displayed drawings taped carefully to the walls. Maya paused at each doorway. Small details revealed larger truths. The children had grown older, but their rooms belonged to younger versions of themselves. Then she reached the end of the hallway and found a closed door. Unlike the others, this one remained untouched. She already knew whose room it had been. Emily's. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the breakfast room windows. Maya carried a tray of orange juice to the table and noticed Ava staring at the music box again. Slowly, Maya sat several feet away. She did not ask questions. She simply waited. Ava wound the key. The familiar melody filled the room. A few notes floated through the air before fading away. Maya listened carefully. Then something unexpected happened. Ava opened the lid wider and stared inside. For the first time, Maya could clearly see the interior. A tiny photograph had been attached beneath the lid. Emily, smiling, holding all three children in her arms. Ava's fingers brushed the edge of the picture. Her expression changed instantly. Not sadness, fear. The realization struck Maya like a flash of light. Throughout the day, she began observing the other children more carefully. When Noah thought nobody was watching, he opened the watch and studied something hidden inside its cover. Liam repeatedly unfolded the faded photograph before quickly placing it back into his pocket. None of them were simply remembering their mother. They were guarding something. By late afternoon, Maya found herself standing before a large family portrait displayed in the main hallway. Emily stood at the center surrounded by her husband and children. Linda approached carrying fresh flowers. "Beautiful picture," Maya said softly. Linda smiled sadly. "Emily took thousands of photographs." She never wanted to miss a moment. Maya studied the portrait. Did she leave letters? Journals? Recordings? Linda blinked. Actually, yes. Boxes of them. Mr. Whitmore stored everything after the accident. Maya turned slowly. Where? Linda hesitated. In the attic. Why? Maya looked toward the staircase where the triplets sat together beneath the afternoon light. Noah held the watch. Liam held the photograph. Ava held the music box. 3 objects. 3 memories. 3 children carrying pieces of something unfinished. For the first time, Maya felt certain she was no longer looking at grief alone. She was looking at a message that had somehow been broken into pieces, and somewhere inside this house, the missing piece was still waiting to be found. That evening the rain returned. Soft drops traced winding paths down the mansion windows while distant thunder rolled across the dark sky. Most of the staff had gone home. The house settled into its familiar quiet, and Maya found herself standing at the bottom of the attic staircase holding a flashlight. Linda had given her permission to retrieve old storage boxes for cleaning inventory, but both women knew that was only part of the reason she was there. The attic smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Rows of carefully labeled containers stretched beneath exposed wooden beams. Holiday decorations, old furniture, children's toys, family keepsakes. Maya moved slowly between them until her flashlight landed on a stack of white archive boxes marked simply with one name. Emily. Her heartbeat quickened. She pulled the first box closer and carefully opened the lid. Inside were journals, greeting cards, photographs, and dozens of handwritten notes. Some were addressed to Ethan. Others appeared to be reminders, recipes, and family memories. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor and began sorting through them. Hour after hour passed. Rain tapped the roof overhead. Dust drifted through narrow beams of light. Then she found something unusual. 3 envelopes. Each one sealed. Each one labeled in Emily's handwriting. Noah. Liam. Ava. Maya stared at the names. A chill moved through her. The envelopes looked untouched. She carefully turned them over. No dates. No explanations. Just the names. Before she could examine them further, another item slipped from beneath the stack. A 4th envelope. Larger than the others. This one had Ethan's name written across the front. Maya's pulse quickened. Suddenly several pieces of the puzzle seemed to shift into place. 3 children carrying 3 keepsakes. 3 sealed letters hidden away. A missing message nobody had ever delivered. She carefully returned everything to the box and carried it downstairs. The grandfather clock showed nearly 10:30 when she reached the study. Warm light spilled beneath the door. Ethan was still working. Maya knocked softly. Come in. He looked exhausted when she entered. His laptop remained open beside several real estate reports, but his attention immediately shifted to the box in her hands. What is that? He asked. Maya placed it gently on the desk. I found these in the attic. Ethan frowned. First he seemed confused. Then his eyes landed on Emily's handwriting. The color slowly drained from his face. He stood and reached for the envelopes. I have never seen these before. His voice was barely above a whisper. Maya remained silent. Ethan carefully lifted the envelope addressed to Noah, then Liam's, then Ava's. Finally, he picked up the larger envelope with his own name. The room fell completely still. Outside, rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, Ethan stared at the handwriting he had not seen in over a year. His hands trembled slightly. Why would she leave these up there? He asked. Maya looked toward the hallway where the triplets slept. Maybe she did not, she said softly. Maybe someone was supposed to find them when the time was right. Ethan slowly lowered himself into his chair. His eyes never left the envelopes. For 14 months he had searched for answers in doctors, specialists, and experts. Yet now, sitting on his desk, lay 4 unopened letters written by the one person whose voice his family had needed most all along. For a long time neither of them spoke. The study seemed smaller somehow, as if the 4 envelopes on the desk had quietly taken up all the space in the room. Ethan stared at the handwriting. Every curve of every letter felt familiar, painfully familiar. He ran his thumb along the edge of the envelope addressed to him but did not open it. Not yet. Across the desk, Maya remained still. She understood that some moments should never be rushed. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. Finally, Ethan stood and walked toward a bookshelf near the fireplace. He rested one hand against the wood and lowered his head. "The week before the accident," he said quietly, "Emily kept talking about writing things down." His voice sounded distant, as though he were speaking from another time. "She said children forget details when they grow up. She wanted them to remember how much she loved them." Maya listened without interrupting. Ethan let out a slow breath. "I thought she was making scrapbooks." He looked back at the envelopes. "I never knew about these." The silence returned. Not uncomfortable. Not empty. Just heavy with memories. A few minutes later, Ethan carefully picked up his own envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. The paper inside crackled softly. He unfolded it. The room became still. Maya watched his eyes move across the page. At first his expression did not change. Then his jaw tightened. Then his shoulders dropped. By the time he reached the bottom, tears glistened in his eyes. He sat down heavily in the chair. "What did she say?" Maya asked gently. Ethan swallowed hard. For several seconds he could not answer. Then he looked up. "She told me not to blame myself." The words barely escaped his lips. "She wrote that if anything ever happened to her, the children would need connection more than protection." He stared back at the letter. "She said they would not need a perfect father. They would need a present one." Maya felt a lump rise in her throat. Ethan closed his eyes. For 14 months he had worked longer hours, scheduled more meetings, hired more specialists, solved more problems. Anything to avoid sitting still with a grief he could not control. And now Emily had somehow reached across time to tell him exactly what he needed to hear. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Both of them looked toward the ceiling. The children were awake. Ethan slowly folded the letter and stood. Then he picked up the 3 envelopes addressed to Noah, Liam, and Ava. He held them carefully, almost reverently. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "I think they should read these tomorrow." Maya nodded. "I think so too." Ethan glanced down at the handwriting one more time. Then something caught his attention. His brow furrowed. He turned one of the envelopes over and examined the back. There, written in tiny letters beneath the flap, was a single sentence neither of them had noticed before. Ethan read it aloud. "Open these together." The words hung in the air. 3 envelopes. 3 children. One moment still waiting to happen. And for the first time since Maya arrived, Ethan felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Hope. Morning arrived quietly. Golden sunlight spilled across the breakfast room windows and painted long rectangles of light across the hardwood floor. For the first time in months, Ethan did not leave early for work. His phone remained face down on the counter. His laptop stayed closed. Nothing seemed more important than the 3 envelopes resting carefully on the dining table. Maya stood nearby with Linda while the triplets slowly entered the room. Noah carried the silver watch. Liam held the faded photograph. Ava clutched the blue music box. The children took their usual seats without speaking. Ethan looked at them for a long moment. Then he placed an envelope in front of each child. Their eyes immediately shifted to the familiar handwriting. Something changed. It was subtle, almost invisible. Yet Maya noticed it. For the first time since she had arrived, all 3 children looked fully present. Ava stared at the envelope as if she had seen a ghost. Noah's fingers tightened around the watch. Liam's gaze never left the words written across the front. Ethan swallowed hard. "These are from Mom," he said softly. The room fell silent. Not the cold silence that had haunted the house for 14 months. This felt different. Fragile. Waiting. Slowly, the children opened the envelopes. The sound of paper unfolding seemed louder than it should have been. Sunlight reflected across the table. Dust floated lazily through the warm air. Maya held her breath. Noah began reading first. His eyes moved across the page. Then Liam. Then Ava. Seconds stretched into minutes. No one spoke. No one moved. Tears slowly filled Ethan's eyes as he watched them. He wished he knew what Emily had written. He wished he could somehow stand beside them inside that moment. Then something happened. Ava's shoulders began to shake. A single tear rolled down her cheek and landed on the letter. Noah lowered his head. Liam pressed his lips together tightly. The room seemed suspended in time. Finally, Ava reached into the music box and carefully removed the tiny photograph hidden beneath the lid. Noah opened the back of the silver watch. Liam unfolded the faded picture completely. Maya's heart skipped. Each item contained part of the same photograph. 3 separate pieces, torn years ago and divided between the children. Together they formed a complete image of Emily sitting with all 3 of them beneath a giant oak tree in the backyard. Taped behind each photograph fragment was a handwritten note. A different sentence for each child. Noah's note read, "You are never responsible for things beyond your control." Liam's note read, "You do not have to be strong every minute to be brave." Ava's note read, "My love does not disappear when I do." The 3 children stared at the completed photograph. Then their eyes drifted toward one another. 14 months of grief seemed to pass silently between them. Ethan could barely breathe. Suddenly Ava looked up from the table. Her voice emerged rough and uncertain from lack of use, but unmistakably clear. She knew. The words echoed through the room. Ethan froze. Maya felt tears rise instantly to her eyes. Noah looked at his sister. Liam looked at both of them. For 14 months the mansion had waited for a voice. At last the silence had finally cracked. The room remained frozen for several seconds after Ava spoke. Her voice was quiet, fragile and uneven, but to Ethan it sounded louder than thunder. 14 months of silence had ended with 2 simple words. She knew. Tears rolled freely down his face now. He did not try to hide them. Across the table, Noah stared at the completed photograph. Liam looked down at the letter in his hands. Ava gently touched the image of her mother with trembling fingers. Maya stood near the window and watched the moment unfold. She knew this was not the end of grief. Nothing could erase the loss the family had endured. But something important had changed. The children were no longer carrying the weight alone. Ethan slowly lowered himself into a chair. "What did she know?" he asked softly. Ava looked at him. For a moment it seemed as though she might retreat back into silence. Instead she took a slow breath. "That we blamed ourselves." Ethan's heart sank. Noah finally raised his head. His voice emerged quietly, rusty from disuse. "The day she left, we argued." Ethan stared at his son. Liam's eyes filled with tears. "We wanted her to stay home." The words came slowly, carefully, as if each sentence had to travel through months of pain before reaching the surface. Ethan felt the room tilt around him. He had spent over a year searching for explanations from doctors and specialists. Yet he had never imagined this. The children believed they had somehow caused their mother's last trip. Ava looked back down at her letter. "Mom wrote that none of it was our fault." Her voice cracked. "She wrote that before it happened." Ethan covered his mouth with one hand. Across the room, Maya quietly turned away to give them space. The morning sunlight continued streaming through the windows, warming the table where the letters rested. Noah wiped his eyes. Liam unfolded his note again. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan stood and walked around the table. For months he had tried to fix things with schedules, appointments, experts, and plans. Now he did the one thing he should have done long ago. He sat beside his children. No speeches. No solutions. No promises. Just presence. The 4 of them remained there together while the silence settled around them once more. But this silence felt completely different. It no longer carried fear. It carried understanding. Hours passed. Nobody rushed the moment. The children talked a little more. Only a few sentences at first. Small memories. Tiny fragments of stories about their mother. Ethan listened to every word as though hearing treasure being uncovered. By late afternoon the house felt different. Not louder. Warmer. As Maya carried folded laundry upstairs, she heard something that stopped her in the hallway. Laughter. Soft laughter. It drifted from the family room below like sunlight breaking through clouds. She closed her eyes briefly. The sound lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. Later that evening, Ethan found Maya arranging books in the library. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology." Maya looked up. Ethan's expression was sincere. "You saw what none of us saw." He glanced toward the family room where the children were talking softly together. I kept searching for someone to fix them. His voice lowered. You simply listened. Maya smiled gently. Sometimes people do not need fixing. Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time in a very long while, he finally understood exactly what she meant. 1 year later, the Whitmore estate looked the same from the outside, but anyone who stepped through the front door could feel the difference immediately. The silence was gone. On a warm spring afternoon, sunlight poured across the backyard where a massive oak tree stretched its branches toward a bright Carolina sky. Beneath that tree stood a long wooden table decorated with fresh flowers and framed family photographs. Noah chased a soccer ball across the grass. Liam sat on a blanket reading aloud from an adventure novel. Ava laughed as she tried to teach a golden retriever puppy a new trick. Their voices drifted through the air like music. Maya stood near the garden fence holding a tray of lemonade. She watched the children and smiled. The sound of their laughter still felt like a small miracle. Not because they never missed their mother anymore. They did. Some days were still difficult. Some memories still brought tears. But grief no longer lived alone inside the house. It shared space now with joy, hope, and love. Ethan stepped onto the patio carrying a small wooden box. He paused beside Maya and looked toward his children. They have changed so much, he said quietly. Maya followed his gaze. They were always there, she replied. They just needed time to find their way back. Ethan nodded. He understood that now. The box in his hands contained the 4 letters. Carefully preserved. Carefully protected. He had read his own letter many times over the past year. Whenever work threatened to consume him or old regrets tried to return, he would unfold the paper and hear Emily's wisdom again. Be present. Not perfect. Present. It had changed the way he lived. He attended soccer games. He helped with homework. He cooked terrible pancakes on Saturday mornings and listened to stories that seemed to last forever. For the first time in years, he stopped trying to manage every moment and simply experienced them. Across the yard, Ava suddenly waved. Dad, come see this. Ethan laughed and headed toward the children. Maya remained where she was. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Somewhere nearby a wind chime chimed softly. Linda joined her at the fence and handed her a glass of lemonade. You know, Linda said, watching the family together. I have worked here for nearly 10 years. Maya smiled. That is a long time. Linda nodded. I have seen specialists, consultants, tutors, therapists, and experts come through those doors. Her eyes drifted toward the children. You are the only one who stayed long enough to listen. Maya looked across the yard. Noah was showing Ethan a soccer trick. Liam was laughing so hard he nearly dropped his book. Ava was trying to convince the puppy to sit still. Ordinary moments. Beautiful moments. Maya felt warmth spread through her chest. The sun slipped lower in the sky, bathing the backyard in golden light. The branches of the old oak tree swayed gently above the family. No speeches were given. No dramatic declarations were needed. The children laughed. Ethan smiled. The breeze carried the scent of spring flowers through the air. And somewhere within that peaceful silence, it felt as though Emily's love was still present, not as a memory trapped in the past, but as something alive in every smile, every conversation, and every heartbeat that filled the home she had always wanted for her family.